Well, what do you know? It's just like waiting for a bus, isn't it? 2,000 years and nothing. And then you get two at once.
My name's Alan John Miller, but I'm actually Jesus.
Of course you are, mate, and welcome back. This is Alan John Miller, and this is his website where he offers his Divine Truth materials for free, because we all know Divine Truth materials should be free of charge to absolutely everybody. And if you're wondering how you could possibly get your hands for free on his free Divine Truth teachings, we'll simply send him $300. Job done. Now, we're going to refer to him as modern-day Australian male Jesus, and he's quite the character, but we're also today going to be telling the story of historic Australian female Jesus, who is a bit of a dick. Now, here she is, before she claimed to be Jesus, starring in Australian soap opera Neighbours alongside Jason Donovan. Oh no, hang on. Sorry, wrong photograph. No, here she is, before she claimed to be Jesus, standing next to her brother in a photograph. Now, to be fair, historic Australian female Jesus didn't have the best start to life, and that might have been a reason why she grew up to be such a massive knob. But more on that in a second. Let's check back in on modern-day Australian male Jesus.
Well, welcome along. I'm Jesus, this is Mary.
Oh yes, I did forget to tell you, modern-day Australian male Jesus didn't come back alone. He also come back with a bunch of disciples and Mary Magdalene, and together they helped save poor people like this man.
Spirits hook into me. Basically step into my body and cause me to do things like, drink all night, take drugs, have sex with random women, just a whole lot of unloving things.
Yeah, I remember life before I got married too. Still, I'm sure you're much happier now you've been saved from all that fun. Anyway, Anne Hamilton Byrne, who does have legs, by the way, was born in 1921, and as a child she had to witness her mother be sectioned and placed in a psychiatric asylum for 27 years after trying to set her own hair on fire in the street. Her father was a hard worker who worked away a lot, meaning that Anne spent most of her time as a child in the orphanage. However, in her late teenage years, things looked like they might be improving for historic female Australian Jesus, as she fell in love with a nice young man and got married and had a baby. But sadly, their attempts to grow their family were all unsuccessful after a string of miscarriages and the death of her husband at just 20 years old in a car accident. And of course that's all very sad, so I need some cheering up now, and who else could do that for me other than modern-day Australian male Jesus, who's using his divine powers, it seems, to teach a bunch of flat earthers how to do basic numeracy. Just look at the miracle he's working here with this previously mathematically illiterate flat earther. He's just asked her to think about how else she could describe a time period of 10 weeks. Come on, I'm rooting for you. You can do this. 7 days in a week. 10 weeks. 10 times 7. 70 days. Come on, you can do it. 10 times 7. 70 days. I can feel this coming. Come on. Ain't no way she's getting this wrong. Say it. 70. 70. Say it. Say 70. Say 70 days. Say it. Here it comes. She's going to say 70 days.
2 and a bit months.
Oh, for chuff's sake. Never mind. Better luck next time. Anyway, back to historic Australian female Jesus. Now, by the time she was 30, she was a yoga teacher who claimed to have extrasensory perception, and she convinced physicist and parapsychologist Raina Johnson to carry out some serious research on her. Now, I do say serious research, but from what I can gather, their serious research basically involved them both getting smashed off their tits on LSD and recording whatever hallucinations that they may happen to have seen. Now, one day during one of these sessions, Raina Johnson became particularly smashed, and when he looked at Anne Hamilton Byrne's face, he decided that, of course, she must be the second coming of Jesus. Now, I wonder if modern-day Australian male Jesus remembers those wacky scientific sessions, because he does seem to remember an awful lot of other things.
I remember all of the events of my crucifixion. I understood what was going on. I understood the reason for my death.
And he's not the only man who remembers it. Meet Cornelius.
I'm called Cornelius, and that was my name in the first century, my identity, my soul identity.
Yes, Cornelius is back from the first century too. Of course he is. And here he is reminiscing about the good old times with Jesus.
I did come across him once, and I asked him about one of my servants that was sick, and he healed the servant. I was just quite amazed by what he did, until the time came where we were asked to go and execute him.
Well, I'll be honest, Cornelius, that's a bit of a dick move. The guy's done you a favour, and now you're going to go and execute him? What a knob.
When my troops had to go and nail him to the stake, it was like a pole. was me that had to do that. And as I just went to get the spike and smash it into his hands, he just kept looking at me, and just so much love that came from him to me. I couldn't do it. I just had threw the mallet down, threw the spike down, and just walked off, which pretty much was my death sentence in those times. You don't do that.
Right, well, it looks like I misjudged you. Sorry, mate, you are, after all, a real hero. And thank you also for looking after that lady next to you, who we all know left her husband to join that group. So I'm sure her husband is very, very pleased that you're taking such good care of her. Anyway, back to historic Australian female Jesus, Anne Hamilton Byrne, who can now tell people that she has scientific proof that she is, in fact, the second coming of Jesus. But as well as being the second coming, she was also a yoga teacher, and we have to remember that she lived in a time where divorce was extremely socially unacceptable, and it was actually illegal to be a homosexual. But the second coming of Jesus accepts everybody. This made her an incredibly attractive prospect to all the homosexual men and unhappily married women that she taught yoga to, and they just couldn't wait to follow her. And the family, as it was known, is born. And you know what? Just like modern day Australian male Jesus, historic Australian female Jesus realised that in her family were also the reincarnation of some of her disciples. Now, I mentioned this to modern day Australian Mary Magdalene, and she doesn't remember anything about it, meaning she wasn't invited. She got very upset. Yeah, it turns out that modern-day male Australian Jesus hasn't quite been upfront and honest about his past exploits. And I'm not surprised, because back in the day when he was a woman, she was a real piece of work. You see, thanks to the pseudo-scientific backing that she was given from Dr. Rayner, Anne Hamilton Byrne was able to rapidly grow her little community, attracting wealthy professionals such as doctors, teachers and lawyers. And as her community grew, her followers wanted to give her something special. They wanted to give her a nice little present. And what was it she asked for? That's right. The children. Now, nobody knows exactly how many children she acquired, but we do know it was a minimum of 28. And we also know that in some circumstances, if one of the members of the family were not offering her children, she just took them.
My mother was a 15-year-old girl whose doctor was a member of a sect, and the doctor organised the adoption, drugged my mother and took me away from her at birth.
Now, historic female Australian Jesus wanted the world to believe that all these children were her own. However, the problem was, due to genetics, they all looked a little bit different. So in order to try and make them look a little bit more similar, she bleached the hair of every single child. The children were beaten, often not by Anne Hamilton Byrne herself, but by the aunties, as she called them. The aunties were disciples of Anne's, and in many cases could be the true parents of the children that they were beating. But this didn't matter to the disciples, who believed in every word that Anne said. They even believed that these children would grow up and one day become a master race that could rule the world. This mistreatment lasted all the way up until these children became 14 years old, at which point Anne deemed them suitable to become full-time members of the cult. This involved an initiation ceremony in which these 14-year-old children were given copious amounts of LSD over a period of several days. Historic Australian female Jesus got away with stealing and mistreating children for so long due to the family's motto of unseen, unknown, unheard. The family lived in an almost perfect isolation from the outside world for 2 decades and were only discovered when 2 children from the camp managed to escape and alert the authorities. Anne Hamilton Byrne fled, leaving behind her a trail of broken families, destroyed marriages, child victims displaying psychological scars. A number of her followers tried to kill themselves, and unfortunately, some succeeded. By the time that she was tracked down, it was revealed that the wealthy members of the community had donated to her over $150 million. So it blows my mind that when she was arrested in 1993, she wasn't held accountable at all for any of the mistreatment of the children. She was simply fined $5,000 Australian dollars and given no jail time whatsoever for fraudulent behaviour, including the production of false childbirth certificates. Before her death at the ripe old age of 96, she was confronted and sued by many of the children that she had adopted and stolen. But like the monumental shitbag she was, she showed no compassion at all for any of the damage she caused. And one of the most amazing things is she was still being defended by disciples who still believed that she was a second coming.
She has a biological mother.
Do you have DNA to prove it?
Police do, yeah.
No, the police. Do you? So you always put it on other people, but do you?
Michael, you're living in a fantasy.
No, I'm not. You're living in a fantasy of pain and deprivation.
Now I'm seriously beginning to doubt whether she was really actually Jesus at all. Not like modern day Australian male Jesus, he's definitely the real deal.
Yes, he's Jesus, and yes, Mary's Mary Magdalene.
Yes, he is. He is Jesus.
That's good to know. And while it's fun laughing at some of the bizarre therapies that modern day Australian male Jesus hands out, such as, I don't know, twatting a phone book with a crowbar. Yeah, despite that, there is actually a very serious side to modern day Australian male Jesus, and that is that his disciples genuinely do hang on his every word and have real emotional investment in what he says.
Whenever I think about him now, I just cry. I'm starting to have a soul, like an emotional realisation of who he is.
Miller seems to grab onto new followers by making them doubt their own family unit and constantly questions them. Do you really think that you are currently married to your real soulmate?
Unbeknown to her husband, she began donating money to Miller and communicating by phone and email. Miller raised doubts about whether her husband was her soulmate.
And in this instance, just like many others, she decided he wasn't, and she left to go and follow Miller. Miller will tell you that he's not at all leading a cult. He's not telling people to leave their families and go and join him, but the reality of the situation is people are leaving their families, leaving husbands and wives and children behind. A community is forming around Miller, and I just hope that this isn't a case that history repeats itself. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're new to the channel, you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much. Please consider hitting subscribe. If you are one of the members or patrons of the channel, can I tell you just how much I love you? And if I was ever to claim to come back as a reincarnated significant historical figure, I promise you that I would only ever claim to be Fred Flintstone, and you could come back as my Barney Rubble. Meow.